Hello and welcome back to my channel. I'm Liv, Colouring with Liv, and in today's video I'll be colouring Rose Red and Snow White from Kerby Rosanes' Dark Fairytales. So if you have a copy of this book, then you can come and colour along with me as well. So I'm so excited to share with you that this was actually a buddy colour with Neko Simi. So I was so excited to buddy colour with Neko because she was one of the first people that I saw on YouTube colouring Kerby's books. So I was so excited to do that with her. So if you want to check out Neko Simi's version of this page, then she'll be posting her version on her Patreon page. So to begin with, Neko gave me a list of 3 pages that we could do together. And those pages are pages 15, 28 and 62. So page 15 was with Peter Pan battling Captain Hook and the big crocodile's mouth. Page 28 was with Little Red Riding Hood battling the wolf. And page 62 was, of course, Rose Red and Snow White, which I decided to colour in. So I had seen a completed version by Regina Coloring and I thought it was so beautiful, so that's why I decided to do this page with Rose Red and Snow White. And I was just so curious of how my version would turn out. So to start with, I decided to use gouache for this particular colouring page because I've just been so curious about gouache and how beautiful everybody seems to paint with gouache. And I was in my local arts and crafts shop and I saw some gouache by LeFranc Bourgeois. And it was actually a student grade gouache, but I thought it would be great to just get started and see what everybody else is talking about. So I've noticed how other people do like a whole wash of colour when they use gouache, but that's some watercolour paper and I'm colouring in a colouring book. So not only can I not use as much water, but also I wanted to use blue and I didn't want the blue and yellow to mix. I didn't want it to turn out into a weird green. I wanted to have those lanterns like a bright white light. So that's why I decided to start with the white in the center and then put the yellow around it so it's not completely yellow on the lanterns. And then I added the rest of the blue for the background and edges. So what I noticed in my last video was that when I used a large flat brush, I added too much water to the page. So in this video, I decided to use my Raphael mop brush in a number 4 because there was less water coming out of the brush. But I kind of went against my own advice when I work with watercolors, is to always let each layer dry before trying to adjust anything. But I also know that when the layer dries, you know, you'll be left with that mark. And I was trying to adjust those brush strokes that were left on the left-hand side. I wasn't too happy with that. And when I tested out the gouache again in my sketchbook, I realized that it was quite hard to control those brush strokes to kind of make a smooth wash of color. That's when I felt like everything was going a little bit wrong. And then I tried to lift a little bit of that paint around the face because I wanted to create a little bit of a glow on their face. But as I kind of lifted that blue paint, it almost looked like it was really cold, and that was like the mist that was coming out of their mouth because it's so cold outside. So yeah, and then I tried to add some yellow on their face, and then I felt like maybe I was adding too much, and then I was taking it away. So then I thought, okay, let's carry on with that blue and continue adding the blue on the bottom part of the page and just finishing that off first before correcting anything more around Rose Red and Snow White. So just allowing that to dry before doing anything else, because I've already added quite a bit of water to the page. So the consistency that I added to the bottom of the page looked somewhat darker. So I felt like maybe I'll have to darken up the top part, and maybe I'll just darken the edges. So I was just trying to go where the light source is, so it'll be dark between the two girls. So I was making sure that was filled in. And then I thought, it would be cool if it was like a kind of misty forest. So I added a little bit of the white, and I thought that would be quite cool to make it a bit opaque in places, and just trying to get that misty vibe, that misty forest. So when I went to use the gouache, I didn't want it to be so opaque that it would cover the lines, but I wanted it to act like watercolor so that I could see the lines. But then I felt like I added a little bit too much water. And the brush that I'm using here is the Raphael mop brush in a number 4. So I think that the right hand side of the page came out better because of the direction of the brush that I had, and I probably should have turned the page around so that I could get a better handle of those brush strokes. So here it is, and it is an imitation of squirrel hair. And now I was going in with another watercolor brush by Meeden in a number 1. And because I thought, I'm doing a watercolor consistency, so surely a watercolor brush would work. But as I was moving the paint around, I felt like I couldn't really, it was difficult to get that fine point at the end to stick. And I felt like when I was using my acrylic brushes, it was easier to keep to that fine point. And because I wanted to create a more opaque finish, I thought that's why the acrylic brushes would work better. And the acrylic brushes that I like to use, which I'll be using later in this painting, are the sepia brushes in number 2 and number 8, and I also have a textura brush in a number 0, all by Raphael. But my Meeden number 1 watercolor brush has seemed to be like my go-to brush, what I use for watercolor this year. Really love it. So as I was adding more of the paint, I felt like maybe I was creating too much of a watery consistency, and I was trying to make it a little bit more opaque, and I found that it was quite difficult to do. And as I was doing that, I probably should have used more paint than I thought that I needed, because when I've worked with acrylic paint, I generally don't need to have as much paint as probably with gouache. Gouache, you would probably need more paint than you would do with acrylic paint, if that makes sense, or definitely more paint than watercolor. And yeah, so I was trying to now fix that background. I was trying to make it more opaque. So that first layer that I did, I was thinking about doing some trees in the background. So kind of making that forest scene and extending that out. And I was so 50-50. So at the moment for August, there's a group on Instagram for Kerby's books. I'll put a link in the description box below with the hashtag. And they are also doing this particular page for the group. So it was quite a coincidence that I was doing this page with Neko Simi for this time as well. So that's awesome. And I asked the group, like, what should I do? And they were like, leave it. Just, don't do anything more. But I was so curious to find out what I could do with my gouache paints, because when I've seen people using gouache and making it opaque and the way how they maybe add lighter trees or foliage to a darker background, I thought maybe I could do that later on if I do add anything. Curiosity got the better of me. So after I added this darker element behind the girls, I felt like it really added to the glow of those lamps. It just added a better contrast. And when I shared that picture with Neko Simi, she really noticed that straight away. And so I was happy I gave it a go and went out of my comfort zone a little bit and tried something new, because I felt like if I just stuck to doing something what I normally do, then maybe I won't learn anything new by just adding maybe like watercolor pencil trees on top of this kind of watercolory-ish gouache background. So I thought, let's get out of my comfort zone and try something new. So as I added that darker element in, and I was trying to fix it with more water and it wasn't working, but I am glad that I decided to add these streaks of shadow on top of the girls. So a little bit on their arms and behind the girls on their arms extending up to their head. You would see more of the glow from the lamps. So I was thinking more in the terms of when I've seen people use alcohol markers and they have like a line of darker color and a line of lighter color. So that's where that influence and inspiration comes from, is just after seeing what people do with alcohol markers. And then when I decided to add the yellow to the face, I did just want to have a little bit of yellow on their face, but I tried to blend it out a little bit and it was going all kinds of wrong. So yeah, even that bit of blue that I added to their arms, I was trying to blend it out a bit, but the paint had mostly dried, so it was a little bit difficult to blend on the arms. So with gouache, I noticed that once a paint dries in the palette, you can still activate it, but when it dries on the page, it doesn't move as much as I thought maybe it would. It seems like once the paint dries, then it's like you're lifting up the paint rather than moving that paint around. Whereas with acrylic, it feels like when you put the paint down, you still have a little bit more time to move the paint, if that makes sense. Whereas this feels like it dries more like watercolor, or maybe that's because I was using too much of a thin consistency. So before letting the paint dry completely, I decided to add a little bit more blue to the hair and shadow elements of the dress, just to kind of have a better base to work with the shadows. Yeah, just trying to use that colour as much as I can, and I love the little details and shadows that Kerby has in his books. It just makes it a lot easier to colour. So yeah, I'll be going from dark to light when I colour the dress, because it's just easier to go from the shadows up into the lighter elements. So once everything is nice and dry, I got out my Polychromos pencils, and I started off with the red dress on Rose Red's dress in dark red in 225, and I thought that would be a good starting point. And I would just go over those shadow elements. So I've already got it painted blue, and I thought that might help with the shadows, and just seeing how those two colors would work together, the blue and the red. So because they're also different mediums, it might help as well. But what I felt was that when I first put the first layer on, the pencil seemed to almost like scratch the paper a little bit, like how it does with soft pastels, but not as badly. It doesn't eat up your pencils as much as soft pastels, but it does kind of have that gritty texture to it. But then as I carried on building up the layers, I felt like it was quite difficult to make the pencils stick to the paper. So as I was kind of going through the reds, so I used dark red in 225, deep red in 223, deep scarlet red in 219, scarlet red in 118. I felt like it was a little bit flat. So that's when I decided to use some other colours, like when I was just using the beige red in 132 on the skin. And I felt like I could bring that over to the dress and maybe use that as a highlight. And then I also thought it would be good to use maybe some dark cadmium yellow in 108 to bring out that light from the lantern onto the dress and extend that light over. And because it still felt a little bit flat with those reds, I decided to add some more blues, just as I did with the blue shadows with the background with the gouache. So I think what worked was the Prussian blue in 246 and the helio turquoise in 155. So I also used some of those colours on Snow White, because at first I was going to have Snow White using the classic colours of the yellow, red and blue, but then I thought as a colour palette, just having Snow White and rose red, so Snow White would be white, just as the flowers and the roses on the left hand side would be white and the roses on the right hand side would be red. And then I added some more browns to the hair, and I felt it was quite difficult to make her hair look either like a reddish brown, or because I felt like as I was putting that colour on, it was too dark in that area. So I was trying to brighten it up after a while, and I put most of the highlights around her face to kind of, like I said, extend that glow from the lantern. But I didn't want to lose, that waviness of her hair completely. So that part was a little bit difficult to try and make you see that it's hair and not just a blob of colour. And then I added some Caput Mortuum Violet in 263, and I felt like that really worked nicely to add a little bit more depth and shadow to the dress as well as to the hair. So sometimes I've used that kind of colour on trees before, that violety brown. It kind of gives it a little bit more vibrancy, a little bit of a different color because I was worried that the colors would be flat. And then I went on to doing the skin. So the colors for the skin, I used beige red in 132, white in 101. I used quite a bit of white because I didn't want their faces to look yellow. So I was trying to make that part lighter, and it did make me wonder about the new Polychromos pencils that are coming out. So they were currently out of stock, but they should be coming in where I live soon. So that was beige red, white, rose carmine, and 124. I sometimes don't use rose carmine, but I felt because her name was Rose Red that maybe a little bit of rose would help. And the rose carmine also created a little bit of vibrancy in the cheeks as well, because the coral wasn't enough. So I used the coral in 131 on the cheeks and cinnamon in 189, kind of more on the shadows of the skin. And then I went on to use some Posca. So I love this Posca pen. I'm so glad I got it in yellow, because at first I was just going to buy the white color, but having a yellow Posca pen in your stash is so good, because things like this where you can add it for doing like the glow on the lights. And I also have a Meeden acrylic marker in my stash, but I just wanted to compare the difference. And I felt like the Meeden pen was a little bit translucent and a little bit duller in color. It wasn't as bright. So I preferred the Posca here. So that's the 0.7mm extra fine tip. And I just put that a little bit around the dress, arms, a little bit under the chin. But when I put it under the chin, I just sort of blended it out a little bit with my finger, a little bit on the hands as well. So then I went over to do the hair. So I just used like pretty much all the cold grays in the set, and just kind of going back and forth and trying to think of how hair strands are, you know, so you just try and build those layers up like that. Because when I was doing rose red, maybe I tried to blend the pencil at first rather than doing the strands. So when you're doing the hair, just make sure you kind of follow those strands of hair. And I think Snow White's hair came out a little bit better. And yeah, so I just extended some of those same colors down to the dress. And again, I'll put the list of pencils in the description so you can see. And that's when I also added some Posca to their hair. So just around the face and a little bit on the tips. At first I was a little bit scared, thinking, oh, have I messed it up? But I actually really like that little touch there. And then just making sure you can see the rose in her hair. So just building that up with some more grey. Yeah, so even though her dress looks quite blue, I did add some grey there, but mostly like the Prussian blue and the helio turquoise. But I did add some other blue as well. I added the sky blue and light ultramarine. So again, that will be in the description box below. And I was tempted to make those flowers on her dress like with a little bit of red and green, but I decided to keep that part blue because I didn't want to, you know, add too much color because I was trying to keep her white. And I'm really happy with the result of keeping Snow White white and just adding those blues like shadow elements to it. I feel like it also adds to that kind of spooky vibe, that Halloween feel. So yeah, really happy at how it's turning out so far. And because I was going over the lines with the Posca pen, it made me think, how can I actually see their hands joining together, because it almost blurs out into that mist. And I added some walnut brown to their hands, and I felt like doing that was a pretty neat trick. So once I was finished colouring the girls with my pencils, I went to use some of my white gouache again, and that's using a number 2 and number 8 in my Raphael sepia brushes. And what I found was that I felt like the number 2 was going to work really well here with the fine details, but I actually preferred the number 8, the larger brush. So both of them have this kind of larger belly and finer point. I almost felt like with the larger number 8 brush that the fine point was easier to control with the gouache. So that's what I was finding difficult before, was trying to find a paintbrush that works with gouache, because some of it is like watercolor and then some of it is like using acrylic. And this particular section is more opaque, and so it's going to be more like acrylic. So that's why I felt like the brushes that I tend to use for acrylic would work well, and they did. So I love these kind of paint brushes that hold the paint in the belly of the brush, rather than a finer, like a small round in a 0 where it doesn't hold any paint at all. Or maybe it was just the cheap paint brushes that I was buying in the past, I don't know. So this is the number 2, and just to show you how that was working. And this is the number 0 in a textura brush. So the difference between this one was that this has a very stiff brush, so that also manages to hold the paint in that fine tip as well. And then I went over the red roses, because what I had done before I started this was I was just playing around with the layers of the gouache, and if I should add my red watercolor pencils directly on top of this blue, or should I put a white paint underneath, like the white gouache, and then color over it with the red. And I felt like by doing that, it brought out the vibrancy of the red. So that's where I was going with this. So I was just making sure everything was a little bit more opaque. So I was kind of using 2 brushes, one to put the paint down and another to kind of blend it to make it kind of smoother. And then with the 0, I was adding a little bit more opacity. And then when I went to use my Caran Museum Aquarelle watercolor pencils, I started off with Scarlet Red in 070 or 070 for the bright red. And I kind of, as I was like I painted it, instead of creating a whole blob of color, I went in the same way as trying to follow those petal lines so I wouldn't lose the illustration. And that actually helped when I went to color it with the darker shadow color of Crimson Aubergine in 599. And I felt like it looked pretty nice as it was, like especially with the glow of the light, it looked really pretty, that kind of watercolorness. And I was leaving some white spots because I felt like maybe that could be like a highlight point, because I still wanted it to have some shape. But I did end up going over this with my pencils later, and even a little bit of my Faber ink pen, the Pitt pen in white. So I think it's looking pretty good so far. at first I was going to colour all of my branches brown, but I felt like I needed to add some more depth to the corners of the page, because I felt like it was so beautiful on that darkness around the girls that I needed to add some darker elements so that you can see those branches. So I used my Prussian blue and 159 from my Caran Museum Aquarelle watercolours. And I also used a couple of other colours like the turquoise blue and permanent blue. The permanent blue wasn't too bad, but the turquoise blue, you couldn't really see too much of it on that darker area. So I just used that turquoise blue more around where the lantern was, to kind of make it appear that that part is kind of where the glow of the lantern hits those flowers. And because that worked so well on the branches, I felt like I could extend that over to the white roses, seeing as I made Snow White you know, coloured with the blue shadows. I felt like that's perfect. I can use that over onto the white roses, and I felt like it worked really well. I really loved how that was turning out on the white roses. Then when it came to colouring the deer, I just used a whole load of browns, but I was trying to make sure that I was getting those strokes, so you could probably see that it was fur, but because it was such a small area to work with, plus the way how Kerby had illustrated this, it was more like was the animal dead and this is just the bone rather than the fur. But when I imagined it, I felt like it was a piece of taxidermy. So I used some really light colours like white and ivory so that you could see some of that fur. And I had a reference photo as well that I found on Google Images. So the deer had a little bit of an orangish kind of fringe, as it were. So I was putting more of that terracotta colour at the top, and then I was just kind of mixing those colours because I didn't want it to be one flat colour of that darker colour. So that's why I was bringing out those lighter colours, and I was just playing around, layering it and seeing what works. So that's why it probably took me longer to colour that particular section than it would for other people, I don't know. And then I thought I can use some of those same colours over onto the horns. So on my reference photo, it looked like the sun was from above, whereas here the glow of the light is from below. So I couldn't really do it exactly like my reference photo, because it was almost black, the horns, with spots of like white at the end of the horns. And I didn't think that would work well here because my background was so dark. So I used some of those same kind of browns for the horns as well. And then there were these little elements hanging from the horns, like almost like a Christmas decoration. So you can't really see that. So I felt like by coloring over it, you can now see it. And then there were these bits of bone hanging. So that's when I brought out some ivory and even a little bit of a yellowish color like the green gold. And you can't forget the little tiny mushrooms and a little bit of moss that's growing around the deer as well. And with the lantern, I was almost tempted to keep this completely white, like the bright white like it is. But then when my husband looked at it, he was like, no, you need to actually color it, because he plays video games, and he was like, you know, when you see my video games, do they just leave it like a blob of white? No. And I was like, yes, you have a point. I need to actually color the bits of the leaves and tree bits. And by doing that and coloring the lanterns, I was like, wow, it really pops at this particular point. So when I was doing the green, I just did like a flat color. But when I was doing the brown of those tree stumps around the lantern, I kind of just did a little bit here and there to kind of make it look like there was light, and using those darker colors on the bottom or on the edges around that. And then with the metal, it looked like gold, so I used the lightest colors in the middle and then working my way outwards for the darker colors around the edges, and just also the lines between the lantern so that you can actually see those bits of elements. So it's like quite a tiny space to work in, but managed to work around it okay. So what I found when colouring things like metal or gold is that you actually need a lighter colour than you think that you would need, especially for the highlight parts. So as light as cream and 102, and light cadmium yellow and 105, and then you can work your way down the pencils like that. But I felt like it wasn't even that necessary to use the cadmium yellow and 107. I jumped straight from light cadmium yellow to green gold, because I didn't want it to be too flat and light yellow at that particular point. You still need to see those darker shadows. So for me, I feel like green gold works well in 268. I also used some brown ochre in 182 and dark Naples ochre in 184. So yeah, I was really happy with how the lantern turned out. then when it came to fixing some of the glow of the light, I was almost a little bit tempted to add some orange with watercolor, but I didn't want to mess it up, and I felt like it was easier to control at this point with some pencils. And I just did a very light layer and just a little bit more pressure towards the edges and very lightly extending that out. So the colors that I used for this section were cadmium orange in 111, dark chrome yellow in 109, and dark cadmium yellow in 108, which is not necessary to use that last color. I used a little bit of it on the left hand side but not on the right hand side, because I didn't want to extend that color out too much. I felt like that was enough. And then for the bird, I used similar colors that I did with the deer. So I tried to have a look at, you know, what this kind of bird would look like and just kind of going from there. So I used colors like cream in 102 for the lighter elements, burnt ochre in 187, burnt umber in 280, burnt sienna in 283, walnut brown in 177, and terracotta as well, kind of more for the lighter elements, in 186. And because I had already have that kind of that gouache layer of shadow elements, it was a lot easier to apply the color where the gouache wasn't layered underneath. And again, I was struggling to kind of build up those shadows on top of that blue. So what I then ended up doing towards the end was adding a little bit more white, whether that was with a white pencil or what worked well was with the white Pitt pen by Faber Castell. And I also used those similar browns for the squirrel, and I felt like it almost looks translucent, the squirrel and the bunny, but it kind of added to that kind of spooky Halloween element to it, where they are translucent. It almost looks like they're ghosts or something. So with the squirrel, I added brown ochre in 182, burnt umber in 280, burnt ochre in 187, burnt sienna in 283, walnut brown in 177, cream in 102, terracotta in 186. And when I was doing the squirrel, I was making sure I was like doing those strokes again, like I did with the deer, and just, you know, just playing around with the pressure of that. And similar colors again with the rabbit, or hare should I say, because it has longer ears. The cream in 102, terracotta in 186, but brown ochre in 182, burnt umber in 280, nougat in 178, dark sepia in 175, Van Dyke brown in 176, and white in 101. And then for the snake, it wasn't really popping, so I needed to add some color there as well. So again, with my pencils, I got out my light phthalo green in 162 for the lightest element, so building up that color in the middle of the snake, and then adding some of the emerald green in 163, kind of as a mid color. And then my darkest color was deep cobalt green in 158, and then having a little bit of cream in 102 to kind of build up some of those texture elements. For the butterfly, I could have made it a little bit brighter by colouring it with the white gouache first and then going over it, or even adding some gel pen. But obviously, before adding gel pen, I would do some pencils. But in the end, I felt like maybe it's better for it to just be a little bit more in the background, but just having a little bit of pop of colour. And maybe I should have added red to this butterfly instead of making it pink, because I didn't want to have too many colours, but I decided to make it pink. And so I added pink Madder Lake in 129, fuchsia in 123, and a bit of white in 101. So as I mentioned earlier, I was considering just leaving the roses as they were without any more pencil on top, with just leaving it like a watercolory rose. But I felt like maybe adding some pencils to make the roses pop a little bit might help. Because I have already added colour, I didn't need to put the scarlet red on top. So we're just working the shadows in dark red and then the white on top of the petals at this particular point. So I used more the scarlet red towards like around the light source of the lanterns. So I was just kind of filling in some of those spots where like maybe it didn't feel like some of that white gouache from underneath was popping through, and it almost felt like it didn't join together properly. So I was just trying to make those roses feel like they would join together and yeah, that they look like roses. So I think sometimes when you do add pencils on top of watercolor, it almost feels like, you know, are you wasting your time by doing this? But afterwards, when I see the results, I feel like actually I do see a difference. But because it does take a little bit of time to add the pencils, it feels like, am I wasting my time? Am I being too much of a perfectionist by trying to add this in? You don't have to, but that's what I felt like added a little bit more of a pop of colour. And I love that I actually continue to do that here. So we're almost at the end. So now, instead of using my white Posca pen, I decided to use my Faber Pitt pen in white. So it's white ink, and adding the white to some of those feathers as well, to the bird. I think it really made the bird pop at that particular point. And I think that really works well with the gouache as well. It's got a brush tip rather than the fine tip like the Posca pen has. So it was great to just try and like blend everything in. So I got some feedback from my husband, and he said the white roses aren't popping as much. And I was like, okay, what do you want me to do here? And he said, oh, like just make those white roses more white. So, okay, let's try and go against what I'm initially feeling like doing, because I thought it looked all right as it was, but I thought, okay, let's just go along with the feedback. And not only did he say to add some more white to the roses, but also for the branches to be more like a frame. So at the beginning, I was thinking of adding brown to the frame, but because I had those pops of brown from the animals, I felt like maybe going over the branches with the white would actually be a good idea. And because it's this spooky, misty forest where you don't see too many colours, and it is kind of like a mix of shadows and light colours. So I felt like yeah, I don't really need to make those branches brown. I can just add a little bit of that white marker. So I feel like towards the end, kind of when you just want to finish a page, adding a little bit of marker, I think really makes the page pop, and it's so much easier to apply. But yeah, it was an easier finish by doing it like that. And also I wasn't too sure whether to color those leaves of the branches green. So if I would have colored the branches brown, I would have colored the leaves green. But because I colored all the branches with that white Pitt pen, I just extended that to the leaves as well. So you could make this, like, if you want it to look like a frame, you could even try and use gold here, you know, something a little bit different, because it is this kind of picture piece. And I was tempted as well to add some more pencil in the background along the edges, just to make it a little bit darker. And I don't know if I should have fixed that at the end or just left it as it is, but I decided to leave it as it is because I felt like yeah, it's a little bit of a misty vibe. Maybe it will take away from that misty vibe, because now that kind of central focal point is not on the edges, it's more in the center where the darker part is. And then I also added some more white kind of around the deer, so it makes it almost look like a spider web. So I thought that was quite cool as well. So let me know in the comments what you think. Should I have added a little bit more of a darker edge to the page? And because after I added those pencil colors, I felt like there wasn't enough texture. So I felt like what I did in my last coloring with my mermaids was I added some acrylic markers. So I added some acrylic markers to the snake as well, in kind of like greens and blues there. And recently I got this gold paint, and I thought, oh, the last time I used it more like an acrylic paint, by just kind of grabbing that whole blob of paint and using it on my treasure. But I thought it's actually supposed to be used kind of making it a shimmer. So I was playing around with it in my sketchbook to see how it would work. And you are supposed to almost use it like how you would with distress inks, by kind of using this brush and kind of moving it in circles. But because I had used gouache and I tested it on top of the gouache, and it actually disrupted and took away that paint from below. So the best way to add it was just by tapping it. So that's what I was doing here. I was just literally tapping it, and just around the orange of the glow, but also a little bit where I try to extend that color. And I felt like the gold shimmer really worked well against that darker blue background. So that's why I was also trying to extend it out so that you could actually see some of that shimmer. It's always nice to add a little bit of, like, you know, metallic gel pen or some kind of shimmer to the end. I feel like it gives it a little bit more of that handmade touch when you can see some of those kind of elements shining through. Okay guys, thank you so much for watching and staying until the end. Here is the final image of my Snow White and Rose Red from Kerby Rosanes Dark Fairytales. Make sure to give this a like, a thumbs up and a subscribe, and comments will also help my channel as well. So, oh, look how pretty that little shine is. Ah. Yay. All right, guys, until next time, see ya, take care, bye.